not been videotaping this whole time?
No, we did. The problem is I didn't have the slides on the videotape. And the problem is if you don't have the slides on the videotape, you can't add the slides while it's taping. So I had to stop the tape.
Wouldn't it throw people off if you're like wearing one thing in the beginning and wearing something else at the end?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody would notice. We'll see.
Oh.
I did change. Why do you think I left? Our softball game just got changed like 20 minutes ago to Hillcrest, which means I now have to get out of here really quickly, and this parking lot becomes a mess. Because I'm supposed to technically leave here in 10 minutes.
Yeah, just leave early.
But
I'll take care of the class.
what was that? Who said yay over there?
Ethan! It was Ethan!
Okay.
I'll take care of the class.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
Okay, why do you guys like want other people? Can't we just want me?
We want you, but no, you can stay here. Yeah, you need to go. Please. It's my life.
Anyways. Okay, Mr. Watts and I already had a conversation about how much more he prefers AP World and Euro to A-Push, and then he doesn't want to teach A-Push, he wants to teach AP
He doesn't
World.
have to teach it. He just has to babysit us.
Okay. All right. Okay, listen. So, thinking ahead, we have 2 days to do the Great Depression. We have 2 days to do the Great Depression, and then 2 days to do World War II. Okay? So we have a bunch to get through. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, you should be on the section with the Great Depression, and we're going to get started on these notes. Now, before we start into the actual events of the Great Depression and the New Deal, we have to first understand a couple of names, okay? So these are a couple of presidents that are going to happen during the 1920s. Now, your first president is going to be a guy named Warren G. Harding. Now, Harding, we should already know because of what historical event? The Teapot Dome scandal, and yes, Harding's normalcy, yes. Now, the Teapot Dome scandal is really what made Harding kind of on the map in a bad way. Harding was really filled with a lot of scandals. A lot of his presidency was not very positive. But if you're a conspiracy theorist and you want a little bit of a conspiracy theory, here's one for you, okay? Now, the Teapot Dome scandal actually did not come out while Harding was alive. You see, Harding dies about 7 to 8 months before his presidency ends. Now, why this becomes a little bit of a scandal in itself. You see, when Harding dies, his wife refuses to have an autopsy done on him. Additionally, he has a closed casket funeral, and nobody's allowed to see his body. Now, 2 months later, the Teapot Dome scandal comes out. Now, some people, I'd never thought that the wife killed him, but apparently that's like a running thing that people think his wife killed him, according to my students. A lot of people think he may have committed suicide in order to hide the fact that this whole Teapot Dome scandal was happening. Regardless, though, Harding goes down as having an extremely controversial and scandal-ridden presidency. Now, who overtakes him is his vice president named Calvin Coolidge. Now, Calvin Coolidge, though, is not very cool.
He sounds cool.
Okay. My other class laughed really hard, so I don't... Okay.
Oh, that's a good one. Man.
Thanks, guys. Makes me feel really great
Is he
about
related
myself.
to the Kool-Aid guy?
No, it's okay. Okay, now Calvin Coolidge comes into the presidency following Hoover's death. He takes it over and then is reelected for another term. Now, Coolidge did do one really big thing in terms of foreign policy. You see, he went over to France, as all treaties are signed there, it seems like. And while in France, he signs a treaty with other countries. And you ready for this? It outlawed war. War is illegal.
Good job, Coolidge.
And 62 countries signed this, including several countries that became involved in the Axis powers in World War II. However, at the time, Coolidge was seen as very successful. Now, additionally, when Coolidge leaves the presidency, he only serves one term, which actually people are really surprised about. But Coolidge was extremely popular, and here's the reason why. You had what's called Coolidge's prosperity, which is where Coolidge leaves office when everyone is wealthy, rich, and spending money. And everyone blames it on Coolidge. They said if it wasn't for Calvin Coolidge, we wouldn't all be rich. Well, what happens is that with Calvin Coolidge, it's actually more of a fake prosperity. You see, what's going on with Calvin Coolidge is that Calvin Coolidge has some underlying things. You see, he's told by his financial advisors, maybe this stock market isn't as safe as it is. Maybe it's going to burst one day. And Coolidge just kind of sets it aside. Or maybe we should be saving up in case of an emergency. And he kind of sets it aside. And so what happens is Coolidge is probably one of the major factors that leads to the Great Depression. In my opinion, Coolidge is probably one of the major, I talked to this with Mr. Kruger, and he says not to use the word cause, but he really led a lot of the policies that eventually leads to the Great Depression. Now, Coolidge, though, is taken over, after he leaves office, Jacob, in the presidency, by this guy, Herbert Hoover. Now, I'll tell you something about Herbert Hoover. I feel bad for him. In fact, I would say out of all the presidents to feel bad for, you got to feel bad for Herbert Hoover. And the reason why is because Herbert Hoover is blamed for a lot of stuff. And when I say a lot of stuff, he's basically blamed for the entire Great Depression. Now, it wasn't really Hoover's fault, though. Hoover is only president for about 5 months when the Great Depression hits. But he happens to be the president during the Great Depression. And the problem is, everyone blames Hoover for the Great Depression. So he actually leaves on a pretty sour note. He's probably, in my opinion, one of the most hated presidents, one of the most blamed presidents. But Hoover, he's actually a really cool guy. He was a huge humanitarian. After World War I, he found hundreds of thousands of refugees' homes across the world. He restored a lot of European economies. But he's tainted because they blame him for the Great Depression. Now, another interesting thing about Hoover, though, is when he's elected, he does have a little bit of an interesting story with his election. You see, he goes against a guy named Al Smith. Well, Al Smith and Herbert Hoover are very different. Herbert Hoover is a pro-prohibitionist. He's a dry. Al Smith is a wet. He believes in getting rid of prohibition. And here's the big one, though. Herbert Hoover was a Protestant, a traditional Christian according to American politics. Al Smith was a Catholic. In my opinion, I think one of the major reasons Al Smith lost the race is because he was Catholic. Now, if you say this now and you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, that's unfair, freedom of religion, blah, blah, blah. Well, back then you were Protestant, or at least you said you were Protestant and then didn't practice. But having a Catholic in the presidency at the time was so controversial and things like that. It wasn't until JFK is the president in the 1960s that this becomes normal. We see a similar thing that happens with Mitt Romney. When Mitt Romney comes out and he did his famous Mormon speech, which is one of the most watched political YouTube videos of all time, is that a lot of people say that that's part of the reason why they think he may have lost, is because of his religious views. So same thing happens here. Herbert Hoover wins the presidency, and we're going to slide into the Great Depression. Now, the nice thing about the Great Depression is that the Great Depression can be explained in a really easy acronym called CRASH. So it's another one of those acronyms that will easily help you to be able to remember what caused the Great Depression. Now, in my opinion, the most important letters in this is the C and the S. Those are the ones that I would star because they are typically the most referenced on the AP exam. So let's start with the C, which is credit expands. Now, during the 1920s, our income levels in America began to absolutely skyrocket. Now, these income levels begin to be the highest income levels in American history. Imagine if in 1923 you maybe made $30,000 and now you're making $70,000 only a few years later. And people were excited. But what happens when people get a bunch of new money? What do they do with that money? They spend it, right? And they spend it all over the place. It's almost as if it's the idea of CC? Conscious consumption, not CCOT. I don't think that's it. But it is a CCOT. It's a continuity in American history. Okay. Anyways, so what happens is people go to spend this money. But the reality is we actually weren't making any more money. You see, if you take away inflation rates, our income level, which you can see right here, was basically the same throughout the 1920s. We actually didn't change. While people made more money, housing costs rose, living costs rose, and it messes up our understanding of how we were actually affected by this Great Depression. So what happens is that the Roaring Twenties, actually, we spend more money than we actually have. Now, how we do this is through what's called buying on credit, which is a key term. Buying on credit. Now, when you buy on credit, what that means is that you are purchasing items that you don't have the money for. You see, you go to a fancy schmancy bank, the bank gives you a card, and it gives you free money called credit. And you can go and spend that money without anybody asking you what you're spending it on. Is that stuff actually free money? No, it's borrowed. But people don't really understand this concept. So what happens is this is a really fantastic explanation of what this is like. You get what you want. You get convenient terms, which typically means barely any money down and getting it for free, and enjoying immediate delivery. You have the ability to buy pretty much anything you want by showing up and signing a paper. I mean, we're talking like buying a car, minutes at most to buy a car. It's very, very cheap to do so. However, if you look at what actually ends up happening here, okay, what I've done is I've put the cost of living at the bare minimum. So we're going to say, as of right now, this is in today's money, if you combine your utilities, your rent, your food, your gas, and your incidentals, at the bare minimum each year for a family of 4, you're going to spend approximately $18,960. That's the bare minimum. Now, we're also going to say that we live at the poverty line, which during the 1930s, approximately 60% of people to 75% are at the poverty line. So we're only going to make $23,500 per year in income for a family of 4. This leaves us about $4,500 for everything else. So your kid breaks its leg, you need a new tire, all that stuff goes in that $4,500. Well, then why is it that if a Model T is $10,300, do we really have enough money to buy that Model T? No. So why is it that 1 in 4 Americans have one then?
Credit.
It's on credit. We barely have any money down. Yeah.
What do you mean by incidentals?
Incidentals could be like, I need to go get a shirt or something like that. Incidentals are just like the little things. So like if I don't know, if I go and I'm shopping at the mall and all of a sudden I see this like, I don't know, some sort of necklace I want, that would be an incidental.
Tiffany?
Oh, I can't afford Tiffany's. But that's what an incidental is. Now, this $4,500 is including like gas money or I already guess. Things like if I want to go on a trip, if my kid breaks their arm. This $4,500, when you're an adult, goes away really, really fast because you have a lot of stuff. Like, oh, car part is broken down, now I'd spend $500 on that. So it's a really low amount of money for that. Okay? So people are buying this stuff when they really can't afford it, and it messes up our economy. Because while the economy seems like we're doing great, are we really actually putting a lot of money in our economy? No, because we don't have it. So let me give you an example. We're going to pretend that I'm a super sketchy like iPad dealer. Okay? And I come in with my super sketchy iPads, and I say, okay, I'm going to sell you all in this class an iPad for $100. Okay? And you guys are excited. Well, the problem is, none of you have $100 in cash. So you tell me, I'm going to give you an IOU. Here's $1. Give me the iPad, and I'll pay you back later. Okay? So I technically sold all my iPads, right? Everybody has an iPad here, and I go away happy. Did I actually make a lot of money off of that? No. It's all these IOUs. And what happens is when you guys lose all the money in the Great Depression, are you going to be able to pay me back?
No.
So who loses all their money, really?
You.
Me. Okay? The borrower. Make sense? Buying on credit? Okay. The next thing is going to be reparations. Okay? Reparations in particular after World War I. Now, Germany, according to the Treaty of Versailles, loses a lot of ability to have pretty much any sort of industry. And so what happens is Germany loses all their land and also loses their land that is responsible for all of the money making. And because of this, Germany's economy begins to plummet rapidly. And here's the problem with that. You see, people want their money back. Remember, Germany was supposed to pay back $2 billion within 3 months. Well, the United States also loaned the Allies a heck of a lot of money. So the United States asked the Allies back for their money. Allies asked Germany to help them pay them back so they can help out the United States. And Germany is unable to afford this, so they ask for a loan from the United States. So the U.S. loans Germany money, who then gives the money to the Allies, who then gives the money to the United States. Did the United States ever really earn their money back?
No.
No. Did the United States feel like they did? Yeah. Okay, let me give you an example. Okay, we're going to say that Lachlan, Jacob, and Hayden are all hanging out together. Okay, and Jacob remembers that Hayden owes him $50. So he goes over to Hayden's like, hey, I need my $50 back. Well, Hayden's like, oh, sure, no problem. Let me just get it from my wallet. Well, he goes over and he talks to Lachlan, and he's like, hey, Lachlan, remember that $50 you owed me from 2 years ago? I need that back. Well, Lachlan doesn't have the money, but he remembers Jacob owes him $50 too. So Jacob gives Lachlan $50, Lachlan gives Hayden $50, and Hayden gives Jacob back $50. In theory, everyone's paid back, right?
Yeah.
Did $150 actually get exchanged though? No. So that's what happens here too. We think in America that we have our money back and we're successful, but the reality is we're in massive, massive debt. Everybody good with me still?
Did Germany pay us back for the loan?
The loan, I don't think has ever been fully paid back. We were paid back for reparations, though. But I believe Germany is still in debt to the United States.
Okay.
By quite a bit of money. So is England. And then we, in turn, are in debt to a lot of other people, too. It's kind of weird. Like, England's in debt to us, but then we also owe debts to England.
Well, they just cancel it out. Yeah.
Because math.
It's all about the money.
Yeah, it's very confusing. But anyways, so it's an endless cycle of debt. I don't think that America ever got its full loan back from Germany, but I do know that back in 2016 was the year that we officially were paid back all of our reparations from World War I. And that's from Germany. Okay. I know you guys are like struggling, so take a second to kind of wiggle around, wake up.
Wiggle.
I know, it's hard. You're on my last day. You're going to be okay. Okay, don't poke others, though. You're rubbing his elbow. Okay. All right. You guys got me for like 15 minutes. Can we handle it?
Yeah.
Yes. No? Okay. Well, try really hard. Okay. The next one is American industry being too dominant. Now, America's industry was extremely successful. It was pretty much the center of worldwide trade because we were importing, exporting a lot of goods. Well, here's the problem. In World War I, we needed a lot of items, and so we mass-produced things. The issue came that... Thank you, Sarah. The issue came that after World War I, our industry, we didn't need as much stuff anymore. Our people did not need bombs anymore, weapons anymore, and so we began to stall in our production. Well, the problem is that we continue to overproduce. We produce as if we were at war. And the problem with overproduction is if we have two... Tyler, you okay?
Yeah. Sorry, that was
What I said?
No.
Okay. Anyways, so the problem, though, with overproduction is that when you overproduce too many items, you have a surplus, and it kind of just sits there. For example, you guys know the iPhone 10?
Oh, yeah.
So the iPhone 10 was supposed to be like the phone, and everyone was going to have it, and everyone was going to be clamoring at the stores for this iPhone 10. Did it meet expectations? No. It's breaking. It's not working.
It doesn't work.
Oh, now I know. And so, what ended up happening is that this iPhone, the iPhone 10, there's millions sitting in a warehouse. We overproduced. Well, when you overproduce an item, you have to be able to make up for this. So, if you overproduce, your prices are going to go down because you want to be able to sell things to the people. When the prices go down, your businesses begin to lose money. When businesses are losing money, they can't afford their workers, so they have to lay off their people. When the workers are laid off, they can't afford to buy goods anymore. So the businesses begin to overproduce for the amount of goods in their economy. The prices then go down. The businesses lose money. They then fire people. Fired people can't buy goods. We then overproduce. The prices go down. Do you see how we are in a circle? Okay? That's what happens. We're constantly having issues. The biggest people, though, that had all the issues, though, were going to be our farmers. And the reason why is because we had grown so much food in World War I that a lot of people were becoming farmers. 30% of Americans were agrarian farmers during the 1920s, which, by the way, is a great continuity during this time, is agrarian lifestyle. Now, when we talk about, though, about why it's hard to be a farmer, back in the 1920s, the average income was approximately $750. A farm family, though, was $272 a month. Okay? That's not a lot of money. That's a third of the average income. So these farmers don't have any money, they're overproducing, and their crops are dying, and the farmers are losing money. We'll talk about them again when we get to the New Deal. Now, the problem, though, when we overproduce, though, is that our trade begins to plummet. Beginning in 1929, before the stock market crashes, we have $5.3 billion in exports. By 1933, this drops to $1.8 billion because the demand is so low. We mess up our production, we overproduce, and it doesn't work out well for us. Now, the stock market crash. Again, if you did not start this, I would definitely make sure that it is started. Okay? Now, the stock market crash, the important thing to know about it, this in itself did not ruin the economy. A lot of people think the stock market crashed and all of a sudden the Great Depression occurred. This was more the catalyst that caused a bunch of other things to happen at the same time. So what happens with the stock market crash is that at the time, stocks were what's called runaway optimism. It was rapidly increasing at a high price. In 8 years, our stock prices rose 597%. In comparison today, that our stocks typically in 8 years rise 2 to 3%. Okay? Our stocks are massively rising. And the problem with this is that when we're investing, the stock market is actually not being invested in as you would think. So traditionally with the stock market, yeah.
So I'm like looking at the graph and there's this high point right up there. If you had sold all your stocks at that high point, what would have happened when the Great Depression hit?
You would have caused the Great Depression.
Nice.
So, and that really is what happened. If you had sold, I mean, technically, if you sold at your high point, which we'll talk about why a lot of people actually did that but didn't do that. If you had sold at that high point, then yeah, you would have had a lot of money, and it would have been great. But that's the problem with stock market is you never know. However, by doing that, you also kind of inevitably caused the Great Depression. So, positives, negatives. But we'll talk about why it's a problem. You see, if you don't know how the stock market works, you have some money, you put it in the stock market, and it's called an investment. You pick a company that you feel like could be successful, you invest in that company, and then later you can withdraw that money and get a higher income as long as the business improves. There's also circumstances where you invest in it and you lose all your money. My dad, when we turn 18, he gives us $5 in cash, and we go invest in the stock market. And somehow, the next day, my money was gone. So obviously, I didn't invest it well. Well, my dad is extremely successful at the stock market. 40% of his income gets put into the stock market and sits there, and his entire retirement fund is in the stock market. And he's very, very good at it. I'm not. Okay? Well, the thing is, though, is that my dad's stocks have been in the market for now, let's see, he started his job. It's been about 20 years that he has had money sitting in the stock market. And most of the time, if it drops, you keep your money in. It keeps the stock market healthy, and eventually, more than likely, it'll go up. Unless you invest in something like Toys R Us, which is obviously not coming back. But it might. The CEO of another company has said he will give $200 million to the company if it'll save itself. I don't know. It's probably not going to happen. Anyways, that's the idea, is that you keep it in and you invest in the long run. But they weren't doing that. They weren't doing what Thomas was saying about putting in money, waiting for it to peak, and then taking it out. Instead, what they did is they invested in the morning, watched the stocks rise, and then that night, they took all their money out. And they do it over and over again every day. Because all these people would invest, it would rise, and they would immediately withdraw it. So while people think, yeah, you're heightening, right? Thomas is saying, I want to get at the peak. Is there really a ton of money in the market when it peaks? No, because we're just withdrawing money all the time. So that's what runaway optimism is. It's where you think there's good investment in the stock market, when it really actually isn't. There's really no investment at all. People are just getting rich quick and withdrawing their money. It's what some people do with Bitcoin. They'll invest into Bitcoin and then they'll try to immediately withdraw it to make some money. Now, how the stock market crashes, okay? So in October of 1929, our stock market crashes. I would probably write down the term stock market bubble. That's what it's referred to, is this bubble in the stock market, that when the stock market crashes, it bursts and the stock market goes down. So basically, when we reach this high point, all of a sudden it crashes and everything plummets, okay? Now, we can compare this to the 2007 recession. Now, we'll talk about the recession a ton. It's very relatable. If you ever say history doesn't repeat itself, go ask people who lost their homes in 2007. It was very similar to the Great Depression. While in the 1920s, our stock market rose and bubbled out. Does anybody know what our bubble was in the 2007 recession? It was houses. Yeah? It was real estate. What happened is that beginning in the 1990s, people began to buy houses. And these houses rapidly rose where we thought, with that chart that we were looking at before, people thought, wow, our housing market's amazing. Houses that are only worth $300,000 are being sold for $750,000. They're really successful. Well, at a certain point, those prices reach a bubble, and all of a sudden, in this case, people stopped buying houses, and the housing market crashed. That's what happens when our stock market crashes as well. Now, an important thing again is this was not the start of the Great Depression, as in this did not all of a sudden the Great Depression happened. It actually took about 6 months. But what happened is that when people lost money in the stock market, it wasn't just them that was losing money, it was also what's called a stockbroker. Now, what a stockbroker is basically it's a person where you go, you say, I want to invest $1,000 into the market. But I don't have a lot of money. I have $100. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you $100. You're going to take your stockbroker $900 and put $1,000 in the marketplace. Then, when we get really rich, you get your $900 back plus a chunk of my profit. Okay? That's the idea of this investment. And stockbrokers still do this as well. You can still get a stockbroker. It's very risky to be a stockbroker, but you can do a stockbroker. Well, what happens is that these stockbrokers, when the economy crashes, you lose your $100, but what did the stock market broker lose? $900. And that's a bank. Your stockbroker is the bank. And what happens is that banks begin to go bankrupt. Well, what happens is when the stock market crashes, you lose all your money. Your stockbroker loses all his money because you lost all your money. The banks then close. And remember, what happens if your bank closes and your money is in it? It's gone. It disappears. And now all your money and savings are gone. So everything begins to connect into itself. Now with this as well becomes the massive bank closures. So banks begin to close in massive amounts. That last date, 1933, the bank closures that are the biggest in that actually ends up coming to out of 4,000, 7,000 banks in the United States, 4,000 close in a single year. So 2/3 of the banks close in just 1 year. We have a massive amount of loss from people. Now, the last one we want to talk about is high tariffs. Now, if you want to connect things to today, you can connect it right now with a high tariff. Now, tariffs are made as an increase in taxes when you import into the United States. You import into the United States for a higher fee. That higher fee, in theory, reduces imports from other countries. People begin to then invest and create things in America. And it's the idea of like American built. You begin to buy American goods rather than foreign goods. It's supposed to help American trade. Okay? Now, why is this a big deal now? We just signed a $20 billion tariff with China. Not with China, I should say to China. What that means is we've created a very high tariff with China in order to basically reduce trade with China so that we can do more like in America stuff as well. So our goal is to be able to increase industrialism in America. But what happens in the 1920s is we pass a tariff called the Smoot-Hawley tariff. You will need to know that term, the Smoot-Hawley tariff. It's very easy to remember because it's a silly word. Okay? The Smoot-Hawley tariff had an extremely high tax rate. High taxes, less imports, people will buy America, and American industry is going to be great. And that's what they thought was going to occur. Well, the problem with the tariff is that tariffs are really successful in the long run. like 10 years in the future, we'll begin to see profits in America and the economy will better. Instead, world trade plummets. Nobody wants to trade with America anymore. We no longer have an economy in America. Other people are not importing our goods, so they begin to collapse, and the world economy begins to crash. As an overall explanation of the worldwide depression during this time, first, the U.S. insists the Allies are going to pay them back. The Allies then ask Germany to pay them back. Germany can't pay them back, and the economy begins to collapse in Europe. The United States passes high tariffs. Nations retaliate. They're unable to trade, and they no longer trade with the U.S., so our economy collapses. World trade declines, and the world economies collapse. And therefore, the Great Depression occurs. The Great Depression was not just the United States, it was the entire world. Anybody have any questions of what we've learned today? Okay. So, you guys finished super early today. But I'm going to go ahead and end it because some of you were like falling asleep with your mouth open and drooling a little bit. So, we're going to go ahead and stop because you were in struggle mode.